Hello and welcome to Your Property Empire. I'm Charles Tarbey, filling in for Chris Gray. On tonight's show, we're going to look at the new data on capital city dwellings and how they've risen, but how growth is slow. Now, what does that mean for consumers and investors? What is happening to our lending markets at the moment, and will the clampdown by banks affect you? And with the big four banks now getting stricter on serviceability, what can you do to increase your chances of getting a loan? Now, across the country, 9.6% of dwellings sold for less than their previous purchase price over the quarter of 2017. Now, has the concern of a slowing market pushed people to sell early, or is the pressure on investors from banks starting to take its toll? Now, joining me tonight to comment on stories is Tom Panos, Head of Real Estate Advertising for News Corp. And Tom, of course, is a real estate veteran, not only a veteran of advertising, but more so a veteran of real estate, and he's out there every day seeing what's going on. So, Tom, what can we expect with pricing around the country?
Charles, I'm surprisingly impressed, even though there's been a bit of a slowdown, that Sydney and Melbourne are staying quite resilient, and we're seeing reasonable clearance rates. Obviously, the marketplaces that continue to be of concern are the Northern Territory, of course, WA, some of the regional areas, but I can say that, you know, even capital cities like Brisbane, they're still performing pretty well, and, you know, with clearance rates hovering around the 60% on the weekend with Brisbane, there's a lot to feel happy about. I don't think that we're about to have a market that's about to come crashing down, or the bubbles bursting, as a lot of the media outlets are saying.
Yeah, well, I keep hearing a great deal about that. You know, you get people talking about the fact that the market's changed, or a couple of months ago, actually, they talked about the fact that the market had peaked. And in May, of course, prices dropped across the country. But, well, guess what happened in June? They bumped back up again. And capital cities, a really interesting one is that Melbourne actually performed better than any of them for the quarter. It performed at plus 1.5%. So Sydney was only 0.8%. So Melbourne's the one that's come through with flying colours. But year on year, and that's the most amazing figure, year on year, Sydney's still at 12.07 and Melbourne is over 13%. So I guess that when you look at those sorts of stats, although some of the mining towns and some of the other areas are down, when you look at those stats, it really does highlight there's a change. And we've got a great little chart and a graph we can show you that gives you those stats in more detail. And it clearly shows that the marketplace is still strong in those areas that you're talking about. And you can see from those charts there that there's 13.7% for Melbourne, which is what we were talking about just a few seconds ago. And the one that suffered the most is Darwin at negative 5.2%. I don't know what to make of it, but when you look around the mining towns and so on, those sorts of areas are really, really struggling. Some of the best performing capital cities, when you look at Melbourne, that's expected, because we talk about Melbourne a great deal, Tom, on the show. We talk about Melbourne, we talk about Sydney, but we've been talking about Canberra and Hobart, and a little later on the charts that we've got there will show you what's going on. So what do you make of what's happening around the countryside from your perspective as an auctioneer?
Okay, so Charles, I'm obviously seeing that this stamp duty concessions that first home buyers are getting are definitely bringing a lot more buyers into the marketplace for properties, say, under 700,000. And I think there are various parts of Sydney, Charles, that have benefited from that, and there's various types of property that are benefiting from that. If, for instance, if it's a one-bedroom unit, even if they're close towards the city, they seem to have far more buyers than previously. So I think a combination of the government support to first home buyers and the fact that whilst we've seen the market slow down, we actually haven't seen inspections totally decline like you've seen at other times when markets have had quick corrections. So I'm sure that, you know, Charles, you've been working in real estate for 4 decades, and you know that you don't mind a slowdown. It's actually a good thing. What we're always scared of is that the brakes go on all of a sudden and people have got to get a parachute out.
Yeah, and that generally starts to occur when interest rate movement goes into the direction that we want it to. We've wanted it to go into that direction. direction. So, okay, well, let's move away from that slide. Let's have a bit more of a chat about the areas and the best yields. Now, I noticed that if you look at the median price in Sydney, it's up around 880, and then you go down to Hobart, and it's down to 355. Now, of course, with it being down to 355, the yields are going to be so much better in Hobart than they would be in Sydney or Melbourne. But at the end of the day, we've got to start advising people on where they should be looking to invest and how careful they should be, because going back to your comment about the interest rate movement, or that comment about the interest rate movement causing problems, if it does move, and there's been talk about it moving, right across the spectrum of people I talk to, they're talking about the potential of maybe 4, 5 or 6 moves. And Tom, if you go from 4% to 6%, that's a 40+% increase in people's repayments. Are you hearing any comments from people out there in the marketplace as to how they feel or whether they're concerned about that sort of movement?
Yeah, there's definitely concern amongst people that have borrowed amounts that are, $800,000-900,000, whereas previously we're seeing a lot of the loans being smaller than that. And the concern there is when they sit down with a calculator and they work it out, they begin to start thinking to themselves, hang on a second, that's not what I actually signed up for. It's really interesting because most people seem to underestimate what they might be paying after a couple of years, and they overestimate how much rent they're going to be getting. And when you have markets like this turn around, that's when people start thinking, this is not as attractive as I thought it would be. So I am seeing a bit of cautious thinking coming in by buyers at the moment.
Well, I know that you're an investor yourself as well. So have you started looking at changing the way you've geared your property? Have you looked at maybe fixing loans, because people were talking people out of that?
Yeah.
The banks were concerned, or the RBA was concerned, that people were fixing loans and thereby not reducing any debt. And if the equity position changed in a downward position, those people wouldn't be in a good spot. Now there's talk of interest rate rises. So what do you do? What's the best way you can hedge your bets in a marketplace that we could be coming into? Look,
Charles, it's interesting when you talk about from my own personal perspective. This year I've prepaid my interests in advance, so you've actually got to take a fixed loan for them to work out the exact payment. But in the past, I've got a foot in both camps, because there have been times where I've actually fixed, and over a 3-year period I have regretted it, and I've wanted to get out of the contract because rates haven't risen to the point that I thought they would be. And there are other times when I've been paying 6.5% or 7%. When rates had been down to 5%. This time I actually wasn't too much of a choice, because I'd prepaid the loans and I had to go for a fix for 1 year. I can't help it, Charles. I actually think that current rates are really attractive, right? And I'm sure that, in the time that you've been working in real estate, I don't think you've seen a period that they've been at this level for a prolonged period of time.
No, I've never have. I was talking about getting terminating building society loans when in the 70s and 80s you would get government-supported loans, and they were 9.75%, and that was low. But I got caught, like most people, paying 18%. I got through it. It wasn't an easy time, but those interest rates really, really tested your mettle when it came to owning property. With the rates so low, I don't think that's an issue. But look, let's have a little look at the charts, and this is something I like to look at, and I'll get some commentary on this from you too, Tom, in terms of the auction clearance rates, properties coming on the market, the rental movement, and also the vacancy rate. So those real estate prices are still being impacted by these clearance rates. In some areas you had 100% out of 100, you had 8 out of 8, 100% in terms of your clearance rate. The Sydney market was performing pretty well. It didn't perform the best. It was 72.5. So the clearance rate was 70.7% for the national, and this time last year it was 72. It's lower, but it's still significant. But Melbourne came in at 73.9%. Did you have that sort of success, or your counterparts did, because you were 100%?
Yeah, Charles, it was a great weekend. It was a good weekend, and I checked with a lot of the auctioneers. I speak to them on the Saturday afternoon, and we were pleasantly surprised because, as you know, it was only about 5-6 weeks ago we saw a change in direction of clearance rates, and we were beginning to think, hey, if it goes like this, by mid-July, we should be down to the early 60s or even late 50s. What we've actually seen is the marketplace seem to reassess it. Buyers seem to have reassessed it, and we've seen the clearance rate decline, and now it stayed steady. It sort of pops around, so that's pleasant, because I have to tell you that 4 or 5 weeks ago, Charles, I was beginning to get concerned that we're going to be seeing 5 percentage point drops in clearance rates each week.
And people were talking about it so much so that everybody was starting to feel the pressure of it. Let's have a look at the stock on the market. This is one that I always like to look at very, very carefully, because it is an interesting statistic. We've had weeks and weeks of decline, actually. Now, coming into winter, that's not abnormal. But this week we had a plus 0.14% over this time last week of stock coming in. That's good for you guys, Tom. Good for realestate.com. Good for News Limited, and I guess good for the industry and the buyers out there. So have you started to see that as well?
Absolutely. So, Charles, like for me to be having full days of auctions, and again, it'll be another full day, we're talking middle of winter, and to be having full days says to me that there's fluency in the market. I mean, I clearly remember that last year I had a number of winter Saturdays where what I was doing is not working or just doing 2 or 3 auctions. So we're definitely seeing it. And I by the way, I love this chart, Charles, because it says a lot. It actually says to us that when there's more properties on the market, it'll actually bring more properties on the market, because a lot of people don't move because there's nothing to relocate to.
Not at all.
So that's a positive chart.
Let's look at the rental movement too, because that had a negative movement of 0.23%. Not fantastic movement, but still over a period of time. That's when you look at that chart, it looks like it's had a low and a high rise, but really we're starting at low 410s up to 430. There's not a great deal of movement. The best performing capital city, interestingly enough, go back to our friends down in Adelaide. They had the best 0.54%. I was speaking to Adam Teague, who's the director of Century 29 Central in Millswood, and he was saying is really quite buoyant again in that marketplace. So we're very happy to see that. Darwin again performed very badly at negative 1.16. So it's been the worst performing capital city of all. And finally, let's have a look at the vacancy rates. And those vacancy rates are still really strong. Best capital city, Melbourne, 1.28%. Well, it's pretty hard to beat that when you think about it. Sydney actually is still 1.36%, but the Sydney market has been in that range for quite some time. The one that we raise all of the time, the concerning one, which we watch very closely, is Perth. That came in at 9.25%, sorry, and those 3 capital cities averaged 3% or 3.96%, closer to 4% this time, getting a little high. So I'm mindful of Perth, and I'm mindful of the overall market in some of those areas like Darwin as well.
Yeah, look. Those charts, though they change most weeks a little bit, the pattern seems to be the same. It's the same cities that give you the same message. So overall, I think that's, for most of Australia, they're good results, aren't they, if you're in real estate?
Yeah, I think they are very, very good results overall. I think the market's been a little bit too crazy for my liking, Tom, and it's started to slow down. But look, after the break, we're going to look at some other charts, which you're going to find even more interesting. So we're going to look at that pain and the gain over various capital cities. So after the break, we'll take a look at those.
New Tic Tac packs are here in banana and mandarin flavours. Despicable Me 3, only in cinemas.
Any guy can wear a hat, but only you can turn heads in one. You've got something. Own it and smell great with new Lynx U.
Power to the people who won't put up with only 28 days of prepaid. Leave the rest behind and make the switch to Vodafone's $40 prepaid data combo. You get 9 gigabytes of data plus an extra 7 days to use it. Vodafone. Power to you.
With over 150 degrees from 10 leading unis, we can help find the right degree for you and support you start to finish. Is that a new one, Joe? Open Universities Australia. It's uni on your terms.
The magic's in the bag. Bird's eye.
Can I get a small car that doesn't compromise on safety?
Can it also look good, be good value for money, with a good warranty?
And storage. I need a lot of storage.
The answer is the new Holden Astra sedan. With a 5-star ANCAP safety rating, 5-year warranty and a spacious boot, it's the car you've been asking for. The new Holden Astra sedan range. From $21,990 drive away. Search Holden Astra to find out more.
Power to the guy who travels like a boss, but pays like a backpacker. And to the girl who'll be landing home without landing a big bill. Power to the people switching from telcos that overcharge you to travel to a network that gives you the freedom to travel further. Make the switch to Vodafone's $5 roaming and use your plan just like at home in over 55 countries for only $5 extra a day. Only on Vodafone. Power to you.
Register today at Elite Singles, where you'll benefit from 100% verified profiles, an extensive personality test and tailored matches in your area. elitesingles.com.au. Never more ready to fall in love again.
For decades, you've been told mass immigration makes Australia richer. Now, new figures expose the fraud. The more people we take in, the worse off you are. Plus, busted, we catch the media lying about Donald Trump. On the Bolt Report, only Sky News Live.
Welcome back to Your Property Empire, and I'm joined by Mr Tom Panos, Head of Sales for News Limited. Now, we talked about at the break that properties in the first quarter of this year dropped by 9.6% of them, in fact, sold for less than what they were purchased for. Now, some might see that as a positive because we've had marketplaces where a significant amount, more than that, has dropped. But in this climate, I don't think it's too bad. And I'm sure when we look at some of the charts, we're going to find why it's connected at that percentage. And I think it actually is not too bad around most of the country, but there are some people suffering out there. So, Tom, do you see the 9.6% drop for the quarter as more of a negative or a positive from your point of view?
Look, in light of what's been happening, Charles, I'm happy with that result, because what we're talking about is 90% of resales are in the positive. So to me, in light of everything that's been talked about, I think that's a positive result when you look at it in context.
Well, you look at the chart that we've brought up and you'll see that the units have been performing poorly compared to houses. So, and that's the thing that we've got to watch, because some people have been investing, a lot of people have been investing in units right across Australia and also in New Zealand, our friends across the ditch. And, of course, the apartments coming into it, people are saying, is there an oversupply? But the oversupply might be just impacting on pricing when you look at that particular slide.
Well, Charles, I will say, I made reference to it last week. A unit sold for $888,000 in Ashfield, only just settled, and it's been resold. And I know that the owners will do a deal at $700 now.
Wow.
And that's typical of many of the new apartment sales in oversupply areas.
Well, let's look at the combined capital cities versus the regional markets, because, again, this is something we talk about quite a lot. The regional markets themselves, you know, over a period of time, you'll notice in that chart there that they perform very, very poorly when you look going all the way back to the late 90s. And as we've started to come back into this marketplace, we're in the regional areas seem to be performing better now. And I mean, we talk about those areas such as Newcastle or Central Coast or Geelong or we talk about Toowoomba up in Queensland, that sort of marketplace, and the Sunshine Coast, which has gone crazy. I have a tendency to feel that a lot of people have avoided the regional areas, and I think to their detriment, because I still think that the regional areas have got a significant amount of opportunity in them. So that chart's starting to indicate to me that the gap is closing and that the regional areas definitely represent a good opportunity.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Now, it gets even more interesting with the charts. So if we look at the next chart, which is combined capital cities, and I like this particular one because it's Sydney versus Melbourne versus Brisbane versus Adelaide. And again, there's a lot of talk out there about investing in southeast Queensland or in those areas. And although they're a very good marketplace, I mean, have a look at that. Brisbane actually has had more pain in its marketplace, obviously, than Sydney and Melbourne, but more pain than Adelaide. Now, that's not something that you would have thought would have occurred.
No. Charles, I've got to tell you, that result surprises me because I would have probably have thought Adelaide would have fared worse. But having said that, I've been talking to a lot of the real estate agents in South Australia, and they haven't been as negative as they'd been in previous times. So, yeah, I think it's reflected there. And I mean, the graphs don't lie, Charles.
And the good thing about all of these graphs, Tom, is that people don't have to look at you and me on the screen. Isn't that good?
Absolutely.
Don't have to look at where we're sitting tonight, trying to talk to each other. Now, look at this next one. This is fantastic, this chart. Not fantastic as in great, fantastic in terms of showing people the real situation across this country. Have a look at what's happening in Darwin. And have a look at what's happened in Darwin and Perth in comparison to the other two markets. The markets that we don't often talk about, Hobart and Canberra, have performed fantastically.
Yeah.
But again, going back to mining, going back to the situation associated with that and unemployment, people having to sell their properties, the pain in Darwin, as you can see, has been almost 40%. And in Brisbane, it's just starting to nudge up to 25%.
Yeah, well...
sorry, in Perth, apologies.
Yeah.
Brisbane's not doing that badly. Gosh, we'd be all in trouble if it was.
Nah. Well, look, that doesn't surprise me one bit because we've got a paper in Hobart. We've got a paper in most of those markets. We don't have a paper in Canberra, but I know from my training in Canberra that they have been very happy. Hobart, there is a real buzz about Hobart. There's a lot of energy in Hobart, and properties are selling very quickly, Charles.
Well, the median price, we said before, $355,000. You can buy brand new brick veneer homes in that region for as low as $275,000. And look, the biggest issue that we always talk about is not just rental return. It's also about capital gain. And so you've got to be careful that the capital gain may not be there in some of those capital cities. But certainly if you're a first-time investor and you're prepared to wait a little while, you maybe wait for the next cycle or the next boom.
Where would you, Charles, out of those areas there, if right now you were, buying and playing the long game in real estate, where would you put $500,000?
I would look very, very closely at Canberra and Perth.
Right.
They are the two marketplaces I'd look at right now.
Right.
Well, now, here's the good thing. We can leave those charts and we can start to look at some of the properties that we have for sale. And because Mr. Gray is not here, and I've got control of the pedal underneath my feet here. I can barely reach it. For those of you who don't know, I'm vertically challenged, so I have to put my seat up high, but I can't reach the pedal very easily. However, I get to pick the properties that come on tonight, and Tom's going to introduce them. There's 3 Century 21 properties, luckily for me. And we're going to start off with the first one. Tom, you can talk us through that particular one.
Yes, it's a Century 21 show tonight.
Yes, it is, my boy.
So let's start off here. What a gorgeous home there. 3/112 Craigen Street in Leura. Very close to your heart, Leura, isn't it, Charles?
Yeah, well, look, the Blue Mountains is where I live, and Leura is one of the most beautiful areas, one of the most wonderful shopping strips. Pretty much every single day of the week, that street is full, absolutely full.
Right, so Bianca Brown is handling the sale of this property. She's got a price guide of $1,150,000 to $1,250,000.
And that might sound high, but that's actually a very, very realistic price range for that area. Bianca and Neil Brown have been operating in that area for a long time. They know it very, very well. But Craigen Street, that's one of the most prestigious streets. You just walk up the road and you're in this beautiful, quaint shopping area. Very hard to get a property to rent in that commercial area because it is always so busy. Fantastic.
So Charles, it's close to the golf course and to Leura Village, so you'd know the area. This is a prominent spot, isn't it?
It is a prominent spot, and the golf course has been revamped down there near the Fairmont Hotel. But the street itself, and I have to declare an interest in property in Lura. I love that area, and I'd buy more property in there if it came up for sale. So,
okay.
Now the second one.
Second property is presented by George Dimitriou from Century 21 City, and it's expressions of interest. And as it comes up there, as you can see, H107 to Key Street in Sydney. It's got a rent guide here of $1,800 per week. And go and check that property out. You'll see more about that online.
Price guide $2.8 million on that particular
Right.
one. So, and again, Ken Sharp and the team at Century 21 right in the city there, they've selected a beautiful property for us to see. And the final one in Tasmania.
Property number 3, 92 William Street, 4th, Tasmania. As it comes up there, we've got a price guide of $690 to $749,000, 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, double garage, great environment for family. It was built in 2013 and they did not cut any corners, no expense spared.
No, and the price guide on that one, Tom?
$699 to $749.
So James and the team down there in Devonport have got that particular property, and again, they're doing exceptionally well. But there's 3 great choices of properties around the countryside, even though I did take liberty with making sure they were C21 properties. So, Tom, what do you think quickly for the weekend coming up with auctions for yourself?
Okay, big weekend again. I'm auctioning all day from 9 to 4. I'm hoping that I get 85% based on what's been going on. I'm going to report it next week when I catch up with you, Charles. But right now, I'm feeling a lot happier than I was 4 weeks ago, where I was very nervous.
Wonderful. Well, look forward to welcoming Mr. Chris Gray back next week, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. Good night.